Okay, it's time. Thanks again for coming. If I haven't had a chance to say hello to you, I apologize. I'll try to get the rest of you at my 3 o'clock talk on Wednesday. So, what this is all about is I've got a tremendous amount to tell you. Server 2012 really excited me when I first saw it. I first got my chance to look at it late August of 2011, and the Microsoft guys said, hey, we're having a thing for you journalist types. Come on up and see Server. And I thought, what could they have gotten done in a year and a half? And within an hour, I was like, oh my God, it's almost like these guys used the product or something, And so, and there's some great stuff in 2012. I implemented it. It's one of those things where, I've been trying to update my infrastructure. And I say, this next version that's coming out is so good, I've got to use it. And then I get halfway through it, and then I see the beta for the next one and say, oh, no, I got to do that one. And so what I'm going to do is going to be very, very fast-paced stuff. However, as is always the case, anything I show you is in your PowerPoint. You don't have to take any notes. It's all going to be in this PowerPoint, and this PowerPoint is on ComNet so that you can pull it down. Okay? So all this stuff is available to you guys now. I basically have 4 things I want to look at. First of all, some new PowerShell tools. You may have heard that there are about 2,300 new, I'm not joking, about 2,300 new PowerShell commandlets in Server 2012. So pretty impressive stuff. How many PowerShell black belts do we have in the room? Let me see. How many of you have PowerShell on your list of stuff I really need to do sometime soon? Yeah, okay. Good, good. This is my goal. I'm trying to drag you all into PowerShell. I'm writing a book on PowerShell, I'm teaching classes on PowerShell, and I'm talking about it every time they let me do it. So wherever possible, we're going to try to do this stuff in PowerShell as well as GUI stuff. So let's start off by talking about the new, my 4 topics. Our new PowerShell tools, NIC teaming. There's a software NIC teaming that's kind of cool. There's a thing called IPAM, the IP Address Manager. Many of you said you wanted to hear about IPAM, and I'm going to tell you about it. But you may be a little disappointed. But I'm here to tell you the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So we'll talk about DHCP failover. And a couple of you asked about DNSSEC. So I will mention that very briefly. It's a very small change, but an important one. So lots of new PowerShell tools. If you've not seen a PowerShell commandlet before, I hope that's not the case. They all will work out as 2 words. The first word is going to be a verb like get, set, new. New's not a verb, but it's close enough. Remove, stuff like that, and then a noun. So the product group comes up with the noun. It's going to be NetAdapter. So rename -NetAdapter. This lets us rename network adapters, which of course we've been able to do in group policies ever since Vista Service Pack 1, but still interesting stuff to be able to do. When you see green, by the way, green means that's an actual PowerShell command. It's not just referring to it. So you could type that in and that would work. New-net IP address. This is going to assign an IP address to a NIC. We could say get-net IP adapter where $__.link, that means the stuff coming through the pipeline, its link speed is equal to 10 gigabits per second. So we're getting more information than we used to get from something like ipconfig. Disable -net adapter. Change a MAC address on a network adapter. So some interesting stuff, all very, very doable from the command line. That making sense so far? Have I lost anybody yet? All right. Another interesting thing you're going to see in all of Server 2012. I do a 2-day class where I just pound people's heads into rubble, where we talk about this stuff. But one of the things we see is there's a lot of get commands. The get verb in PowerShell it's like list, show, display, reveal. And so if I say something like this, if I do get-net adapter, it goes out and gives me some basic information about my network adapters. But it knows a lot more. It's interesting. The PowerShell commandlets in 2012, it's almost always the case that they know a lot, but they don't tell you a lot because they don't think you can handle the truth. Here's how to say PowerShell. PowerShell, we have ways of making you talk. So the way we do that is we say get-net adapter. We pipe that into select. Select says these are the things I want to see. Star, that says show me everything. And then pipe it out to out-grid view. Or, it's got a shorter name, OGV. And if you do that, you get this. It's a nice little spreadsheety looking thing that's got all kinds of information about your NICs. And that'll work with just about any get command that you needed to see. In the DNS world, in the DHCP world, the DHCP team these guys are absolute madmen. It's a bunch of crazy guys in Hyderabad that for the last 4 or 5 years, they've been doing some fantastic stuff with the DHCP server. We're going to see DHCP server failover. That's the last thing I'll cover. That's one of the neat things they've done. Another thing, though, is they built 103 DHCP server commandlets and 100 DNS ones. Now, if you are a command line fan, you already know about the netsh command. You already know about the DNSCMD command. But here's a new one, and this new one is, these are all these PowerShell commandlets. So let's look very briefly at a few, and again, I'm sorry I can't demonstrate them all, it's just a matter of time, but you should try them out. They're super easy to set up. If you do get-DNS server, it goes on for pages and pages and pages with configuration information I wasn't even aware you could do in a DNS server. Here's a cool thing, though. If you do get-DNS server and you do an export-CLI XML to some file, that's got all that configuration information. You could take that XML file to another DNS server, import CLI XML, A.XML, set DNS server, and you have now just duplicated the configuration of a DNS server. Would that be useful? Of course it would be. It doesn't rebuild the zones, but everything else is all set up. So kind of cool stuff. Lots more other stuff. Test-DNS server. And it's got a test for forwarders. It's got a test for root hints and things like that. Here's a way that I'm going to create a brand new zone. If I create a brand new zone, I can either make an AD integrated one, and the way I signal that it's AD integrated is I say add-DNS server primary zone b.com rep for replication type. So I say replication domain, replication forest, replication legacy. If on the other hand it's going to be a standard primary and secondary where there's a file, an actual text file, then I'd say add-DNS server primary zone a.com-z, which is short for zone file, and then the name of the file. This will test. So a couple of you asked me about DNSSEC. Is anyone doing DNSSEC out there? Are those crickets I hear? Well, anyway, if you are, it's hard to test it. It's hard to test whether you've done the crypto right. This is a one-liner that'll do the job for you. Nice DHCP server stuff. There's an example of creating an address reservation in DHCP. And by the way, you don't have to be running Server 2012 for these features to work on your legacy systems. If you issue many of these commands from a 2012 system and have it remotely go to an earlier DHCP server, a lot of these things will work just fine. Okay? So keep all that in mind. Anybody here ever worked with an RDMA board, remote DMA boards? I don't get a lot of hands on these. These are a special kind of NIC that you would use to quickly move data from a short distance. So maybe on one side of your server room, you've got your servers, and on the other side, you've got your storage, and you want to talk to them at very high speed. Using similar network cables to the kinds that you know about, but because they're not going to go that terribly long a distance, again, some of these do have very different cables, these things that look like NICs are basically just vehicles for very, very fast transport of data from one machine to another. Think of it as being LAP-Link for your data center, for those of you old enough to remember LAP-Link. So, can't be routed and stuff like that, but it's gosh darn fast. Some of them run at up to 56 gigabits per second. 56 gigabits per second, and you can team them. I got to set one up where we were moving data across a data center almost as fast as 180 billion bits per second. I'm having a little emotional reaction just remembering it, you know? So it's some cool stuff. And in addition, you're going to find that Microsoft wants you to know about that and why. Because they're going to show you a way to build cheap, fast clusters. Cheap and fast clusters using RDMA boards. So start thinking about that. I want to talk to you next. Oh, you know what? I don't want to leave this topic without talking about something very important. You've seen a bunch of these PowerShell commandlets, and I think they're pretty cool. But you know what the best part about them is? When you get information out of a PowerShell commandlet, you can pull that into variables, and you can put together scripts, and don't turn me off because I said script. Look, I'm not that smart. I went to a state school, you know? But Stony Brook. Anyway, so I've had this problem in the industry for a while here. It's not my only problem, but I've had this problem in the industry for a while where an old friend of mine has got a problem. 21 years ago, I downloaded Microsoft's first beta TCP/IP stack. It was codenamed Wolverine. Why we name things after smelly animals, I have no idea. They're not pleasant creatures. Anybody remember Wolverine? Windows for Workgroups 3.11? Yes, I am that old. Okay, so anyway, there was this great command line tool, ipconfig. I loved ipconfig. It told me everything. But you know, like a lot of us, as time goes on, ipconfig's got a little thicker around the waist, you know? And he's not so quick on the uptake anymore, you know? Let me show you an example. So, for example, on my system here, I could do something like this. And if I say ipconfig/all, I mean, look at this mess. Tunnel adapters. What do we need a tunnel adapter for? Somebody trying to escape? You know, I just don't like this stuff. And come on, you could do this. And it tells me about things that aren't connected, and it's a mess. The first time, I fired up Vista, and I typed ipconfig/all, and it scrolled off the screen. There was this great disturbance in the force, as if millions of administrators cried out in pain at the same time. For years, thank you. I'm just telling the truth, my friends. I'm just telling the truth. And for years, I've wanted like an ipconfig/no BS switch or something like that. Give me an XML file where I could say, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that. And I've been meaning to teach myself enough C++ to do it. But in December, it was a Saturday morning, and I was playing around with server and all these get dash this and get dash that, and I said, well, that's got, and that one, and that piece is, and I heard a voice behind me say, we have the technology. We can rebuild them better. And so I spent 3 or 4 hours doing the gets to find out what I could find. Collected all that information, read up on how to make a PowerShell module, sat down in about another 4 hours, so 7 hours start to finish. I built my first PowerShell module, a module called get-ipinfo. Anybody here read my newsletters? Well, I talked about, did anybody take that off my newsletter? Any of you try it? No. Well, let's take a look at it. So, now, let's be clear. I'm not a programmer, nor do I play one on television, okay? But here's my guy, get-ipinfo. See? Nice, succinct. It tunnels the tunnel. What do you think? Is it gorgeous? No. Well, all right, but the thing is, no, thank you. Here's the point. I wrote a really crappy module to do it. And you've got the source code. Pull it down, make it better. Look at this module. It will teach you how to build PowerShell scripts. It will really get you along those lines. And I'm actually working on a new one. I haven't really tried this yet. But this one is an improved one. It's a get-ipinfo 2. It's still in beta. See, it does network analysis now. And, well, I'd say maybe. My app might have to go in for sensitivity training. That's it's possible here. So let's talk about Nick Teaming. So Nick Teaming's been around for a long time. How many of you do data center-y stuff? Okay. So a lot of you might have purchased teams of NICs. I mean, what is a NIC team really? It's you buy 2 or more of the same NIC, typically, in every case I've ever seen. And then when you get the NIC teaming, it's really nothing more than a driver. It's a driver that lies to the operating system and says, oh, there's not 3 NICs there, there's 1. In much the same way that if we are doing a RAID controller, right? If you've got 5 drives on your RAID controller, how many drives does Disk Manager show you? Just 1. Same story. But you know, Microsoft's always had software RAID as well. And don't laugh, because storage spaces, you know, there's a thing that's like software RAID in Server 2012. Whole different topic, but I want to mention it quickly, called storage spaces. Basically, the idea is you can take a server box and put a bunch of drives on it, run some software, and it becomes a SAN. I mean, essentially, for 25% the cost of a commercial SAN, you get about 75% of the capacity. It's some really, really neat stuff. And whenever I talk about it, people say, wait a minute, Mark, isn't this the same thing as that software raid that we've been laughing about since 1993? And my answer is, well, when I first started playing with software raid back in 1993, I was running it on a 40 megahertz 386 or something like that. And I upgraded to the 60 megahertz Pentium. I couldn't afford the 66 megahertz. Those were the really fast ones, And things have changed. My laptop now, when I last checked, runs at 3100 megahertz. And matrix operations are built right into Pentiums. So yeah, stuff's changed, And think about what that RAID controller is. I mean, what is your hardware RAID controller? It's a controller, it's got a chip on it. What kind of chip? It's not a Pentium. It's probably an ARM or something cheap. What kind of software is on it? Some stuff on a ROM chip. By the way, do you get security updates on it every month? So give it a try. That's another topic, but definitely do look at that stuff. Nick Teaming says, let's do the same thing. Let's take this concept and let's do it in software. So I'm going to talk about what's in it for me, why you care. I want to demonstrate it for you. I want you to understand a little bit about how the failover works. Has anybody here tried to configure software Nick Teaming in 2012? Okay. Did you find the questions a little confusing? I mean, I found the questions just a little bit like, wait a minute, this is harder than it ought to be. So I'm going to try to make that as simple as I possibly can. So what it does is, for example, I take 3 NICs on my computer, on my system, and they've all got names. Because what are the names now, by the way? So the names in the versions of Windows we've used are like local space, area space, connection. I hate spaces in names because I do command line stuff. And the second one becomes local space, area space, connection space 2, and so on. In 2012, the first one is called Ethernet, just Ethernet. Second one's Ethernet space 2. We can't get rid of those spaces. And your Wi-Fi, your wireless network becomes Y-Fi. So shorter names, that's nice. That makes the scripting easier. Anyway, they've all got names, and they've all got IP addresses. We run some software, we wave our magic wands over things, and we now have what looks like one NIC with one address. What's it going to do for you? Well, it means that when you're sending data out of that server, it'll use all 3 NICs at the same time. So potentially, again, this all boils down to performance monitor and where the bottlenecks are, but potentially, you're pumping 3 times as much data out over the internet or over your network. Make sense so far? On the incoming side, there may be no increase. But if you have the right switches, it could be up to 3 times on the inbound side. You also get failover. If one of those 3 switches breaks, or if one of the 3 switches breaks, or one of the 3 NICs breaks, or one of the cables fall out, then you've still got capacity. So that's the idea. Now, why do you care? This is always a reasonable question, Mark. Why do I care? When you install your servers, you get your 1U servers that you roll into the rack. How many NICs are on them? 4 on a lot of the modern ones. I used to say 2, but the more modern ones are 4. And there's some with even more. So how many times have you connected a server and you've only plugged in one of those NICs? And the other ones are just sitting there. And because that's a connected, doesn't have anything on it, it's dropping electricity onto the floor. That's where static electricity comes from. Many people don't know that. But so wouldn't it be nice if you could plug them and reduce the static electricity that's going into your carpets? And basically the idea is this: you already paid for it. So because you got these extra NICs, I'm going to tell you, plug those suckers in, and you will get at least some performance improvements. I know, Mark, we don't have enough switch. Yeah, okay, if that's the case, then, hey, they're throwaways. Get a Netgear or something like that. Tell that to your IP guys. Tell your Cisco guys. Watch their heads explode. Yeah, we're going to use these extra NICs, but we didn't have enough switches because the Cisco stuff's expensive. We got some of the Linksys. You like the Linksys or the Netgear better? What do you Cisco guys? Oh, the Belkins? Maybe it's the Belkins. That's it. Yeah, that's okay. And it lets you team NICs from different vendors. You can't do that in most cases. And it also gives us some nice failover. If you want to look for it, the official name is LBFO, Load Balance and Failover. And the PowerShell noun is Net LBFO Team. So what do we know about it? You can use any combination of NICs, but be very careful. Do not, in general, team NICs of different speeds. And why? If you've got a 10 gigabit NIC and a 1 gigabit NIC, and you team them, what have you done? You said that half of your outbound bandwidth, half of your outbound traffic is going to go on the 1 gigabit NIC and half of it on the 10 gigabit NIC. Does that make sense? Okay? So that wouldn't make sense. There is an exception, but in general, that would not make sense. Is this okay so far? Have I lost anybody yet? Okay. All right. You can mix speeds. We'll talk about that in a moment. You can't use these RDMA boards. There's another tool that will do that called SMB multi-channel. You can have up to 32 NICs in a team, and I try to be very honest when I do these presentations. I've never tried this because I don't have a computer that's got space for 32 NICs, okay? So that falls in the projectorware category, okay? So you can control it with either Server Manager, if you're that kind of person, if you're a GUI person, or PowerShell, if you're someone. How many of you are not going to learn PowerShell at all? Come on, it's all right. It's okay. Come on. You can admit it. All right. I just want to see who's not going to be here next year. That's all. So it's just so. That was mean. I shouldn't have done that. But by the way, the TechEd, the template that they gave us for PowerPoint. This text is about half that size. So if you see other presenters and you can't see their text, it's not their fault. What happens is they just didn't resize the text. I was told I shouldn't do it, but I made this bigger. So that's bigger. That's how bad these templates are. But anyway, so let's see how failover works. If I have 3 NICs and 1 dies, what's going to happen? Well, if it's UDP, there's a 2/3 chance it went over one of the other 2 NICs because there's 3 NICs. That'd be good. If it's UDP and it went over the bad NIC, we lost it. But the underlying protocol may do retries. For example, DNS is very UDP heavy, but it also does retries, right? If it's TCP and it went over another NIC, you're fine. If it's TCP and it went over the bad NIC and got lost, we're going to find that from checksums. So essentially, the thing I want you to understand here is that nothing in NIC teaming involves some new magic protocols. This isn't some new protocol 99 that you've got to teach the Cisco switches about or something like that. Nothing like that. Nothing like that at all. All they're doing is just leveraging what we already know about TCP and IP. Okay? Does that make sense? All right, good. How the bandwidth aggregation works. Now, the way that works is, here's the first important point. What if I were downloading something huge? Like maybe I had a server and there's a file the size of a service pack that you were going to download. So this is a trick question. If I have 3 NICs on that server, are you going to be able to download that service pack faster than if we only had 1 NIC? So you see the question? I've got a team of 3, and you are pulling 1 file down a very big file, okay? The question is, will the team make things faster? Okay, so you have several possible answers. One is yes. How many go for yes, it's going to make it faster? Come on, it's okay. Have the courage of your convictions. How many say no, that's not going to happen? How many go for the consultant's answer? It depends. That's the weasel answer. So, okay. And then have the 4th answer is, I don't know, fat man, that's why we hired you. Okay? So these options are mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive. Let me say that phrase again. Mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive. So you got to answer once. So how many go for yes? Come on. How many go for no? It depends. And I don't know, that's why I paid to come here. Okay, the answer is it depends. And here's why. Remember I told you it was a trick question. I did warn you. You're thinking that when you right-click something and download a file, that is one TCP IP connection, and you are often correct. If I have a big file on my site and you pull it down, because my site's pretty simple, that's going to be one TCP connection. And you notice here that it says LBFO does not spread a single TCP connection across multiple NICs. I want everyone to understand that, because it seems odd when you first hear it. You're like, wait a minute, why shouldn't we do this? If I've got 10,000 packets, 10,000 blocks to send, what's wrong with sending 333, however many? You know, a third of them on one NIC, a third of them on the other, and a third on the third NIC. You could do that. You're not breaking any rules. But the problem is the receiver now has all kinds of packets that are out of order. And the receiver now needs to burn up a lot of memory shuffling this stuff around. So Microsoft made the judgment call, probably a good one, that single TCP connections are not spread across a NIC team. Does that make sense? But I told you it depends. The reason it depends is that if I download a service pack from Microsoft, what actually happens? I don't download the service pack, do I? Microsoft wants me to load that Akamai download manager, and what does that do? Well, that changes the rules. It takes that one big file and makes it a lot of TCP streams. So the answer to the question again was, yes, if we're talking about very simple downloads, absolutely no improvement. But if we have a download manager of some kind, then because it's multiple streams, we will see a benefit across my multiple NICs. Does that make sense? Did I lose anybody? What's that? Oh, what about SMB file transfers? SMB, it depends. Okay, so I'll try to do this real quick. If I'm net using to you, that is one TCP connection, unless I have a receive side scaling board. So if you've got an RSS type board, then 2012 will sniff that out and it will bust it up into multiple TCP communications. Okay, so, and that's new to 2012. Okay.
But if you put this thing on like a SQL server, it wouldn't maybe.
If you put it on a SQL server,
I'm just trying to think of something where
sure.
You could have multiple TCP connections.
Right.
Does it sort of round robin do one TCP on one NIC, one TCP on next NIC?
That's a great question, but I'm not going to make believe I know anything about Squeal server. So that's just okay. No, seriously. I mean, no. No, I'm saying if I'm sitting on SQL command and I'm sending commands, I don't know whether those things all become one TCP. It'd be a question how you wrote it. So I don't know. So I'm weaseling out of that question. Okay. So okay. I just want to be clear on that. So switches affect bandwidth results. Remember I said that all three NICs participate on the out, but only one on the in. That can change if you have teaming smart switches. Teaming smart switches, and there's a number of kinds out there. There's kind of been two generations of them. One is the so-called static teaming, where you have to configure the switches a lot, or at least a little. And then there's these sort of magic does-it-automatically ones called the Link Aggregation Control Protocol, or LACP type switches. So basically what this boils down to is, if you're going to build a NIC team, you've got to say, what kind of switches do you have? And there's three possible kinds of switches. Dumb switches. Yeah, your Linksys, your Belkin, your Netgear, those guys, okay? Next one's going to be the static, kind of, I think of them as older sort of switches. And then the third one's going to be the dynamic ones, so-called LACP. So part of what we've got to do is to tell that to our system. And I'll talk more about that in just a moment. Again, any questions at the moment? Have I lost anybody? Okay. They've got the hot lights on me, so I can barely see you guys, so that's why I'm doing this. Yeah, in the back there. Yes, please. Sir, in the red? No? Okay. Yes, please. So if you just want to build a cheap cluster, will NIC teaming help? Sure, why not? I mean, if you've already got the NICs in the first place, right? It's just the situation where it's not going to help is that you've got that server board and it's got 4 NICs on them, but they're all 1 gigabit NICs. And you went out and bought a 10 gigabit NIC for it. I mean, at that point, adding the extra 1 giggers doesn't really help you all that terribly much. Does that make sense? But if you do have the four NICs on the board, and you got the switch space for them, plug them in. Yes, and a live migration will definitely. A straight, sorry? Oh, okay. Well, if you have more than one NIC, and even if you don't have a switch, then you could always say, I have dumb switches, and you get that effect. You have to have two NICs coming out of the system at that point. Okay? Sure. Good. So our teaming options, we've got to answer 3 questions. This here is it's one of those Monty Python configuration things. Answer me these questions 3, ere the other side you see. And so the first one is, the one movie that I know with confidence that every person in this room has seen is Grail. I mean, some of you might not have seen the latest Star Trek movie. Some of you might not have seen all the Star Wars movies, but I know you've all seen Grail. So, anyway, so we've got no teaming mode. And again, Microsoft did a nice job with this. It's nice that we have this stuff, but the labels could use some help. Teaming mode should be called, what kind of switches do you have? Then there's another one called load balancing, and really that should be called, are you using Hyper-V or not? And the third one's called active/standby, and that's the closest to being helpful. That's the one that says, do you want to have a NIC that only works if the other one dies? So those are the 3 configurations you've got to do. What kind of switches do I have? Am I using Hyper-V? And do I have an expensive NIC that'll be working most of the time, but I got a cheap NIC that I want to be the failover point? Those are your 3 questions. Does that make sense? Let's look at them in a little more detail. So, teaming mode, first of all, is, so, tell me about these switches of yours, So the first thing is switch independent. Switch independent always works. Switch independent always works. And why? Because it assumes nothing about the switches. Now, let's be clear. If you have those sexy, fast switches that can do teaming, and you set it to switch independent, well, the teaming is going to work, but you're not going to get the performance that you could get. But the point is, if you just want to hack around with it and you're not sure, you can never go wrong with switch independent. Another scenario where switch independent might be nice, talking about failover. Have you ever had a switch die on you? That was a stupid question mark. Of course they've had switches die on them. Okay? Yes. You could decide to run your NICs through different switches because you're trying to look out for the possibility that a switch dies. If that's the case, you have to say switch independent, even if the switches are smart. So that's switch independent. 3 reasons to use it. I don't know what kind of switches I got. I know what kind of switches I got, and they're not too smart. Or I'm going to use more than one switch in the team. That makes sense? Questions, anybody on that? All right. Understand, nobody hires me to build data centers, so if you start asking me about Dell switches and stuff, I'll just go, so just so you know. Switch dependent. Switch dependent means we have switches that understand teams. We have switches that understand teams, and they are static switches. And the way you'll know is that they don't work right unless you configure them. Those are the kind of older, they're sometimes called static. There's an IEEE number for it, and it's an IEEE 80, I don't remember it off the top of my head, forgive me. And then there's the smarter ones, the newest ones. Link Aggregation Control Protocol. These are so-called dynamic teaming, and they pretty much configure themselves. I mean, there are times when you have to do some hand configuration, but generally not. Okay? Does that make sense? Questions, anybody?
You say that it's not optimally efficient. Is that just because you're offloading some of that processing on the CPU on the server?
I'm sorry, which?
Switch independent, number one, the last bullet point under.
Okay, yeah, right. So the reason that I say it's not optimally efficient is that, remember, if you're going to go switch independent, you got 3 times the outbound bandwidth for 3 NICs, but on the inbound, you don't have any extra. If you've got the right kind of switches, you got 3 times out. I keep using my 3 NIC example. Don't write down 3 saying that's the magic number for NIC teaming. It's just in my example, I've got 3 NICs. And so in that case, I have 3 times the outbound, which I always have, but I also have 3 times the inbound. Okay? And by the way, this does do things. I mean, I had some cheap NICs I stuck in one of my servers in my little data center, the room over my garage, and, moving big whacks of data from one Hyper-V server to another. Significant changes in performance. This is like with $19 NICs. So, some fun stuff. Load balancing, what's this all about? Load balancing is all about, again, I've got my 3 NICs. I want 1/3 of the traffic to go out from NIC 1, 1/3 from NIC 2, and 1/3 from NIC 3. How do I separate it? I'm greatly simplifying. But the idea is that you essentially take something on the packet, maybe it's checksum, and you hash it. Divide it by 3. If it comes out 0, it goes this way. If the remainder is 0, it goes over here. If the remainder is 1, it goes over here. The remainder is 2, it goes over here. That isn't exactly what gets done, but that's the basic idea. And that works, by the way. That setting is called address hash. And by the way, it is the default setting. So again, if you do one of these installs where you're just going, okay, till it stops asking questions, you're going to be fine. Where you get in trouble is a very specific edge condition. How many of you do Hyper-V? Okay, good. Has anybody done that SRIOV thing where you put a board into your Hyper-V box and you essentially take that board and unmarry it from the host and marry it to the guest? Have you ever done that? It's new in 2012. SRIOV, single root IO virtualization. It is, if you have a virtual server that is, it's network bound, try this. It's actually pretty cool. So you get it its own NIC, and then you do a little fussing around with Hyper-V Manager, and you say, NIC number 7, the host doesn't see it anymore. Only the virtual machine inside that host sees it. And if you run ipconfig, ipconfig doesn't even see it anymore. If you do that, if you do SRIOV, is everybody good with that? And if you do more than one physical NIC, so 2 physical NICs bonded to a virtual machine through SRIOV, in that case, the problem is that when you're using virtual NICs, it doesn't know which NIC is which. Because on physical NICs, it's looking at the MAC address. But on virtual NICs, it looks at the address of the virtual switch in Hyper-V. Because all of the NICs are on the same virtual switch, they look like they have the same address, and so it can't spread. That's a much longer and ugly discussion. Did that make enough sense? Okay? So the trick there is in that case, if you say, in the unlikely event that I have 2 or more SRIOV NICs on a virtual machine and I'm going to team them, then I have to set the option not address hash, but Hyper-V switch. The only other reason you do this would be if you built a bunch of virtual NICs in a virtual machine, you were teaching a class or doing a demonstration or just wanted to fart around with it. And at that point, you'd also set it to Hyper-V switch. Okay? Questions on that, anybody? That was very ugly. That was like 94 pages of white paper to finally understand that. So it's address hash by default. There's only that one edge condition where you set it to something else. Yes, sir, please. Can you team 2 NICs to one Hyper? Yeah, absolutely, sure. Yeah. All that stuff. Yeah. Okay. All right. And then we have active or standby. By the way, this is the hardest thing we're going to do in this entire talk, this little section here. So your brains will be able to, relax in a little bit. Okay. So active and standby. Normally, the 3 NICs in the team are always working together. But you could pick and say, you, Nick, you're not going to work. You're not going to work unless that one's dead. So where's this helpful? Okay. Well, we've got a server. We slid it on into the rack. We don't use its NICs because they're 1 gigabit NICs. We bought a 10 gigabit NIC, spent a lot of money on it. And it does the traffic. Normally, would we team a 10 gig NIC with a 1 gig NIC? Absolutely not. It would mean that half of our traffic would go through 1/10 the speed. But we could say, 1 gig NIC, I'm decided to make you part of the team. It says, really, coach? I can be on the team with the 10 gigabit NIC? Yeah. But here's the thing. I need you to do nothing until he dies, okay? So the idea is you say, got the point? Let's see how to do it. Time for demos. This is the high-risk part of the presentation. All right. So we start out, we go to Server Manager. And in Server Manager, it's got stuff. And I could go over to NIC Teaming, click Enable, click Disabled. And at that point, I see this page. Whoops. At that point, I see this page. So it says my DC1 is online. See, it's got that special new icon. It's not just up, but it's got a big fat circle around it too, so it's really important. And it says teams. We don't have no teams because there is no I in team. But there's me if you pick the right letters. So this then says we got 2 NICs. One's called internal and the other one's called internal 1. Now I want to show you how easy this is in the GUI and how hard it is in PowerShell, okay? So I'm going to select these guys and then I got to figure out what to do next. You see a next button? Does anybody see a next button? Well, see, part of the new style is I was always told that all caps were like shouting. But now I guess the rule is you can be all caps if you're small. So if we go over to tasks, then add to new team. All right. Oh, look, we got a team name. How about team 1? And then it's got checkboxes here, just to make sure I wasn't fooling, Then there's additional properties. That's where I can do things like I can set my teaming mode. See, switch independent is the default, address hash is the default, and we don't stand by as the default. Those are great defaults. You can't hurt yourself with that. You may be losing performance, but you can't hurt yourself. And so I can click OK. It thinks about it. And it also has that groovy kind of graphic thing. Oh, there he is. And, failed because media disconnected. Come on, you can do it. I know you can. There we go. Think about it. It says connection pending. Anyway, eventually it'll figure that out. And that's all nice. But, I don't really want... I really don't want that team anymore. I'm going to get rid of that team. And we don't have any teams. No team. Let's break up the team. I know it's sad. Okay, so no team. I wonder if there's an easier way. Is there an easier way to do this? I hear you cry. Is there an easier way to do this? I hear you cry. I'm glad you asked that question. And I think I might have messed this up because, let me just check my VMs here. Come on, you. There we go. I want to make sure that other Nick is not connected to a non-existent. No, it's fine. It's fine. It's just whining. Okay, good. So the way we do things, come here. You could do it. There we go. So the way we do things in PowerShell is you're going to create something, you say new dash something. And in this case, I got to know the noun, and it's got something like net lbfo l, and I don't want to have to type the rest of it, so I press tab, and that does the job for me. Okay. And now I could say new net f l, you know what I mean. And I got to give it a name. Let's call it team 1. And then I know there's a parameter that starts with T, but I can't remember what it is. Oh, team members. That's it. Okay, yeah. And I could say internal 1, comma, internal 2. Thank you. It's nice to know that one of us is paying attention, and so it's not me. And it's going to say, are you sure? Because it's imagining that it's like Friday night. I don't have much of a life, and so I'm sitting in front of the console, just me and some tequila, and I'm just randomly typing stuff. And that's why it's going to say, you sure? But that annoys me because, friends, I was born sure. So I break a lot of stuff, too. And half the time when PowerShell is going to want a confirmation, you want to get rid of it, you say dash confirm colon false, $ false. The other half you say dash force. The two options do the same things, half do one, half do the, I have no idea why that is. So we think about it. It may bark at me because it's waiting for those guys to connect, but bam, there it is. Was that hard? Did you notice that was faster than screwing around with the GUI? I say, friends, did you notice that? Okay, good. Am I selling anybody on PowerShell? Seriously, the reason I want you all to do PowerShell is because many of you have purchased my books, and I appreciate that because, by the way, thank you, because if you hadn't done that, I would have had to get a job, and I'm not sure I could handle that. And the other thing is I want you all to keep your jobs. Every year, there's fewer and fewer of us, and there's more and more of those users and those machines and cloud people buying more servers. And seriously, if you can't automate stuff, then the next riff that comes around, they're going to be looking at the non-automating people. So this stuff isn't that terribly hard. What if I want to get rid of this thing? Oh, but let's not do that. I love this team. I'm feeling good about this team. But once you team a Nick, its name goes away. So if I say ipconfig doesn't see internal 1 or internal 2 anymore. So we got to give it a name. Now I know this is command new-net IP address, and I can never remember the syntax. If only I had some help. Well, I do. I could say show dash command new dash net IP address, and a thing pops up. And basically what the thing says is, those are the parameters, and the ones with the asterisks are the ones you absolutely need to put some values on. So the interface, as I recall, the interface is now called what? Team 1. It's going to have an IP address, 10.0.0.1. As job, confirm, yeah, sure, confirm. Default gateway, 10.0.0.1. Preferred lifetime. Prefix length, that's how long is the subnet mask going to be. That's 24 bits. And I think I got that. Now, once I've filled that in, you see that run button? I'm going to push that run button, and it will go and... Oh, I did it backwards, didn't I? I checked the box, which meant I wanted to have to confirm. My mistake, sorry. So now it comes up and it says, there's that command. It says new-net IP, see it? Net IP address, interface alias is team1, IP address is 10.0.0.1, confirm, default gateway, blah, 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 blah. And so basically what I have here now, Yes. What's it not liking? No, it's good. It's good. Okay, here we go. Eventually, PowerShell's a little hard of hearing sometimes. You have to say, you say that's a yes, PowerShell. I say PowerShell. That's a yes. The one thing it didn't give me is I didn't put a DNS server on there. I want to get the DNS server on there as well. I can figure that with a set command, set DNS client server address, and then I can say the name of the NIC. That's team 1 dash server, and then the number for that. Okay, I think that's right. What I miss? Oh, set. Yeah. I just got started with this PowerShell stuff. Picked a book up on it yesterday. I'm just. I type stupid stuff whenever I'm in front of people. I don't know why. The probability that I can actually type something correctly is inversely proportional to the number of eyeballs watching me do it. So, that's right. Okay. So. Is this making sense? Did the PowerShell stuff? Questions on it, anybody? Show dash command is your friend because there's some commands you're going to want to use, but you don't want to have to memorize. And show dash command just takes any PowerShell command, makes it into kind of a simple GUI kind of thing. So, any questions on this?
I have a question. So
Please.
Is it really hard of hearing there, or is it actually prompting you with 3 separate combinations of 3 separate commands?
I don't know why it asked me 3 times. I probably wasn't paying attention and pushed the wrong button. That would be my problem. The 55 times I tried this before I came up in front of you people, it worked the first time. So, I don't know what was going on there. So, I could blow it up and put it back on if you like. Okie dokie. All right, then. So, with that in mind, while we're here, why don't we look at some stuff? What does a team look like afterwards? So, if I go to Control Panel and Network and Internet, and the Network and Sharing Center. I just love that. The Network and Sharing Center. Doesn't that sound like it's a place where they got cookies and milk 24/7? Network and Sharing Center. I want to live there, So, the Network and Sharing Center. And I know that when they were laying out Server 2012, I don't know this for a fact, but I believe that what must have happened is that I imagine that Satya, the president of the server tools business, I imagine he's standing in a conference room with like 75 people there, and he's got a clipboard in front of him, or maybe a tablet or something like that. And he's like, all right, Server 2012 has got to be the best server we ever did, guys. We need some ideas. Let's get some ideas. And somebody raises his hand, and Satya says, yeah, what's your idea there, young man? He says, let's make sure that to get to the NIC properties, it's going to require one mouse click more than the previous version of server. And Satya looked at the tablet and said, dude, it's already there. I need some better ideas, people. Better ideas. Let's go. Actually, do you know why server has such a goofy interface? It's to make you want to learn PowerShell. Microsoft is doing you a favor. That's why. All right. Just want to look at some of the effects here. Notice that in the Network and Sharing Center, you still see the 2 NICs, but you also see the team. Separately, though, if we do an IP config, it doesn't see them anymore. Even if I do an IP config /all, it doesn't see them anymore. And I know what you're wondering. What does get-ipinfo do? Fails miserably. So, I was honest about it. And then I got some slides here. By the way, I'm going to bang through the next 15 slides because they're screenshots and they're repetitions of what I just said. This isn't Mark got behind and he's running through slides. Yes, please. Yes, please. Get-ipinfo, if you get on my site, newsletter 101, there's all the code. Okay, so, and believe me, it's not the prettiest thing. It needs some work. It's still an open source range, so it's closer to open source range when it comes to so. All right, so that's the GUI that we already saw. Do we need to see it again? See, and then there we are building our team. We called it DC1 team at this point. Remember these options here: switch independent, address hash. Has anybody got questions on those options again? All right. And you have your PowerPoint to refer back to. It now shows we've got the team. The team is up and running. Everything's groovy. There's the PowerShell command. New-net LBFO team. Its name, the team members, and the confirm. You can also add teaming mode, load balancing, etc. There's a screenshot of me doing it. That's an IP config to get started. And then afterwards, we do our net LBFO team. We come back. If I do get, remember get is the thing that shows you what you already have. Get this net LBFO team. Shows you what ones you've got. As I mentioned, once those things have been teamed up, once they have been teamed up, they no longer exist as separate NICs. That means you've got to give them an IP address, either that or DHCP. And as we saw, the control panel has one way of looking at it. ipconfig has a different way of looking at it. I'm going through that stuff quickly just because it's a review of what I just did. Are there any questions on that? All right. One more thing. If you intend to use this, and you really should, there's a very, very well done, very brain-melting, it's about 60 pages, something like that. There is a white paper about NIC teaming that you can find on the Microsoft site. It is quite good. It's going to be slow going, but definitely read it. All right, I want to go to IPAM, the IP Address Manager. So IPAM is a completely new feature. It's not a role in Server 2012. And the idea here is that something's going to help you keep track of IP addresses. How many of you keep track of your static IP addresses with a spreadsheet? Yeah, okay. This is a little better than that. So it's supposed to do a lot of things. In my experience, it's not great at many of them, but it's very good at I want to keep track of my ranges of static addresses and that sort of thing. It even does a cool thing where if you turn some auditing on, it will give you a report of all the IP addresses that a given user has been on in the last month, which is kind of interesting, you know? So, setting it up is straightforward. It's just very, very easy. It collects information about static IP addresses. It can go to a server and grab that information from it, or you can tell it. You can do that for blocks of v4 and v6 addresses. This is the other nice thing about IPAM, is that if you've ever typed an IP v4 address, you know that's no fun. Once you get to typing IPv6 addresses, though, that's when you start looking for the retirement plan. So it's nice that this stuff can be grabbed automatically. It also has things it'll look for in Microsoft Quarantine servers, if you're using NPS servers, on domain controllers, DNS servers, and DHCP servers. Also, I don't know whether I can talk about this yet, so I don't want to get my ass killed, but IPAM radically changes in R2. It is, I can't tell you? Okay, good. IPAM radically changes, and it's like an hour. As a matter of fact, I think one of the guys from the team is doing a talk about this, and it's worth taking a look at. Because basically their idea is you're going to build a private cloud, and you're trying to keep track of lots and lots of IP addresses for lots of virtual machines. This is the tool. So IPAM is going to change radically in R2. So, how do we get it to work now? It's really very straightforward. There's only one thing you've got to do. The IPAM server, this is going to be short. It's really easy. The IPAM server needs to go out and tap servers on the shoulder and say, tell me about yourself. The servers are going to say, why should I tell you? We've got to loosen up some permissions. IPAM calls that provisioning. Provisioning means loosening security so that IPAM can interrogate the disks, okay? To do this, you have to create 3 group policy objects. This is the wonky thing about it, so pay attention, please, on this. You got to create 3 group policy objects. One loosens up the DHCP servers, one loosens up the DNS servers, and one loosens up the domain controllers and the quarantine servers. The way you identify them is you pick a prefix, any prefix, and then you have to name the objects, whatever that is, underscore DNS, that's one of them. Whatever you picked, underscore DC, underscore NPS, that's the second one. And the third one's going to be whatever you picked, underscore DHCP. Is everybody with me? We're going to build 3 group policy objects, one for DHCP, one for DNS, one for quarantine and domain controller. Is everybody okay on this? Please. Is it possible to make that work with third-party DHCP appliances? I don't know. My guess would be no, because I'm going to guess that, I don't know this, but I'm guessing that IPAM's queries are going to be standard RPC queries, and they're probably going to want to be talking to Windows APIs. Now, so maybe the third-party tool is mimicking it. I don't know, but my guess would be probably not. Okay? That you heard that was a guess. That didn't answer your question. Okay. It's called provisioning. Now to do this, you start IPAM and it says we want to do provisioning, and there's two options. Okay. First is manual. Manual is where you don't build the group policy. You walk around physically to every single server and muck around with remote registry and registry settings and permissions. Only do this if you're being paid by the hour. And if a psychiatrist has certified you as being relatively sane, because it will drive you crazy. So the other one is group policy based. How do you create these group policy objects? You could create them by hand, but again, unless you're getting paid by the hour, I would recommend not doing it. Instead, you knew it would be the answer. A PowerShell command is here to save the day. It looks like, it's in green there, invoke -IPAM GPO provisioning. Then the name of the domain, -domain, space bigfirm.com, -GPO prefix name. That's that prefix I told you about, and it's going to create three group policy objects. PAM GPOs _DNS, PAM GPOs _DHCP, PAM GPOs _NPS _DC. So you'll get those three. You then have to give it the FQ, the fully qualified domain name. I don't know why you need the fully qualified domain name, but you do. And the next option is -IPAM server FQDN. Now, at moments like this, when you're saying, that man's been sniffing something. Why does he like typing commands this long? Tab key. Tab key, tab key, tab key. Let the tab key do the work for you. So there's the FQDN, and then there's the name of whatever it is. It then identifies the domains managed, discovers the servers, and you're done. You notice some interesting stuff also about the UI here? The colors are kind of interesting. This pale powder blue against a gray white. I don't know why. I always feel like I'm supposed to be covering one of my eyes and, reading the top of the thing. So as you run through that will then start producing reports for you. And again, in my experience, the DNS and the DHCP things are pretty basic. I mean, I could do better with the older tools in some senses, certainly with PowerShell. But, if it works for you, great. And you also have the audit logging information. That's the fun stuff as well, because that's the way you can actually track what IP addresses one of your users has been on at any given time. So the keys to troubleshooting IPAM all boil down to the same thing. You install the feature. Run the PowerShell commandlet, please. Figure out a way to identify your DNS servers. Easiest way is to put them in an OU, because then you can apply the group policy object to that OU. Or you can use group policy filtering. Or you could use WMI queries as well. So those are all going to be possible ways to do that. But you need to find a way for the DNS GPO to get to the DNS servers, for the DC GPO to get to the DPs, and the DHCP GPO to get to the DHCP servers. Does that make sense? If it doesn't work the first time, don't sweat it. Never did for me either. But, yes? No. So the question was, in order for IPAM to work, do all of these guys have to be served 2012 boxes? No, because a lot of this stuff, this is just RPC calls that have worked probably, well, I'm guessing, on a Windows 2000 DNS server. So, okay. Yes?
I think I tried it on a DC and it blew up.
You tried it on a DC and it blew up. I think the role thing, I think I knew that and forgot that, because the first time I tried to do it, doesn't the roles and settings wizard, whatever it is, it barks at you, right? Yeah. Oh yeah. Well yes. It wants to save the good news until the end. So that's just, okay. So that's IPAM. Again, basic, simple this time around. Expect to see some big changes in R2. All right. I got 16 minutes to talk about DHCP failover. This is really cool stuff. This is something that warms the cockles of my heart. Because years and years ago, when we heard about DHCP, what did we hear? We heard that DHCP, I remember this came out in NT 3.5, and I was asking the people I knew at my ISP, who were all Unix guys, and they said, DHCP, that's an evil Microsoft plot. I said, I think there's an RFC. I think it's an actual standard. But in those days, those guys were doing boot P. They're like, no, boot P is the only way to go. DHCP, nah, that's for communists, that sort of thing. And it was sad learning TCP/IP like in 1989, trying to get help from the ISP when I was doing it with OS2. That was just that was grim. That was grim. But sometimes that's the way to learn things. Anyway, and you remember what it said if you read the NT 3.5. By the way, today's what, June 3. Do you know what happens in like 30 days, 31 days? It's going to be like July 23rd. July 23rd is the 20th anniversary of NT 3.1 being released. So, you'll have parties in your neighborhood, right? And now you know why. So, anyway. So, I don't think to kill it, if we're talking about software, absinthe seems to make more sense, I think, so. Anyway, so the answer was that you could have these scopes, and you think, oh, this is one server that's handing out addresses, it should be backed up. But the RFC specifically says don't do that. Now, we all do anyway. Everybody does the 80-20 rule, is that right? Where you've got 80% of the addresses sitting in one DHCP server that is near, in terms of hops, that subnet, and maybe you have another DHCP server that has the other 20%, and it's sitting further hops away. R2 had a nice feature, the 2008 R2 had a nice feature where you could say, I'm the second DHCP server, but I'm not going to respond for 30 seconds. So it's a nice kind of feature because what it says, or actually I think it's in milliseconds, you can actually say, if you're the backup guy, absolutely do not respond until you're very sure that the main guy isn't responding. So that was nice. But this is based off of a working paper created in 2003 that never became an RFC. But it is a set of instructions about how to build a 2-node DHCP failover cluster. Now let's be clear. How many of you ever built a failover cluster? Okay, so forget that I said failover cluster. You don't need shared storage. You don't need enterprise server, which doesn't exist anymore. You don't need anything. 2 copies of standard server, each of them running DHCP. You don't need any shared storage. They just kind of chatter at each other over the lines. Very simple. Only 2 machines. One machine looks out for the other one, or perhaps they share the load. There's 2 different modalities. So it really is as simple as that. It really is as simple as that. Because of time, I'm just going to show you some screenshots. I won't be able to do it for you. But it's super easy to set up. And the idea then is that this cluster, this pair of DHCP servers, they see things in three meanings. They're either normal, everything's fine. Communication's interrupted. I'm one DHCP server and I can't talk to my friend anymore. And then there's partner down. Sounds like a 70s cop show, right? Partner down is where the other guy's dead and I've picked up, the entire scope. So we start off by sharing the scope, as you're going to see. I've got some addresses, you've got some addresses, you hand out yours, I hand out mine, I don't touch yours. But as you're going to see, if I'm not talking to you anymore, if you're not communicating with me, I may step in and steal some of your addresses and hand them out for very short leases. But once I've decided that you're gone, you're not coming back, I go all Al Haig on the scope, and we just take the whole thing over. Okay. So we'll see how that's going to work. Basically, the way it works, 2 DHCP servers, they share a scope in some way. They share the addresses. If one DHCP server goes offline, stops talking, the other DHCP server keeps handing out stuff from its addresses. If it runs out of addresses, it reaches over to its friend's bag and hands out those addresses. But instead of handing out 8 days, hands out like for 2 hours or 20 minutes. You can set that. That's called the MCLT, Maximum Client Lead Time. Now, if you've worked with DHCP before, then you know that DHCP has always been an acronym-rich area. Nothing has changed about that, okay? So we've got lots of new acronyms. If we're in partner down mode, and by the way, by default, you never go to partner down mode. By default, you just keep shouldering the load. But there is a setting that will change it over automatically if you want to do that. I'll get into those. But first of all, now let's ask the question, how do we divide them up? Well, there's 2 approaches. One is hot standby mode. In hot standby mode, if I'm the hot standby, I have 5% of your addresses and I don't help out at all. The only time I wake up is if you're dead, if we're partners. And then there's load sharing mode. Load sharing mode, we go 50-50. You get the odd numbered MAC addresses, I get the even numbered MAC addresses, something like that. How do we do that switchover? So what have we seen so far? 2 partners, only 2. No special shared storage. We divvy up the addresses. And we either share the load or I just wait for you to die. And I've already said this to you, but if I can't talk to you anymore and people are screaming for addresses, I'll start stealing your addresses and hand them out, but not for the normal long lease, a shorter lease. And by the way, that short lease, there it is. Maximum client lead time. Another one's called the auto state switching interval. Auto state switching interval, this is off by default. But if we turn it on, if I say, if you're down for X minutes, at that point I assume you're dead and go on without you. That is off by default. And I'll show you how to do this in the UI and with PowerShell as well. So there's a lot there. I want to restate it. DHCP1 goes down. What's the first thing that happens? DHCP2 isn't hearing DHCP1 anymore because they chatter back and forth. They've got a heartbeat back and forth. Are you all right? Yeah, how about you? I'm perfectly fine. How about you? Yeah, I'm also feeling very good. And how are you doing? No, how are you doing? And it does this stuff all the time. Right? But if I'm talking to you and you're not responding, we go to communications interrupted mode. Once I have used up all my addresses, I steal some of yours and I hand them out for the maximum client lead time. And by default, that's where we stay forever. If, however, you've checked the box and included a time, I will wait for that time until finally I have to say, I'm going to have to go on without them. And at that point, we take you out of the cluster, so to speak, and I'm handling the entire DHCP scope. Okay so far? Yes, please. If the other one comes back from the dead and we start doing a communication, I'm going to say, you're dead. So, yes, I say, don't stop that, you're dead. Don't talk. Okay, that's, yes. How does it handle if just the communication between the two? What if we get a split brain cluster? It's fine. It's fine because, first of all, what ends up happening is that it depends on how your DHCP servers are set up. Like if they're in the same subnet, they'll hear each other doing other chattering and they'll figure that out. But failing that, they're just going to stay within their particular, because think about what always happens, right? It's a great question. Is that your concern is both DHCP servers are up and they're both handing out addresses, but they don't know the other one is? But here's the thing. What's been happening with DHCP when it hands out an address ever since NT4 Service Pack 3? Duplicate address detection. DAD. So Dad says, oh, you know, I just got an IP address, and let me just make sure nobody else has got it. Okay, so we've been doing that. The DHCP clients in the Windows world have been doing that since before Windows 2000. So even if there was some problem between the DHCP servers, the DAD broadcasts would solve the problem. Okay? So, anyway. Also, these the back and forth chatter, the are you alive? Yes, I am. We don't want someone to be able to spoof that. Because I could stick a bogus DHCP server in by just spoofing communications and shutting another machine off. So what we're going to do instead is that we're going to use a shared secret in order to sign the back and forth communications. And it's super simple. It's just a shared secret. You can't set it up for certificates or Kerberos or any of that kind of stuff. And these communications work on TCP port 647. So our steps are going to be set up two DHCP servers in the domain. They seem to be in the same domain. They have to be in the same forest at least. Authorize them as always. Set up the scope on one of the DHCP servers. So one of your DHCP servers has the scope. We good so far? Right-click that scope and say failover setup and pick a partner. So I'm on DHCP server 1. It's the only one working with my scope right now. I right-click, say go to failover options, and it says who do you want to add? I say DHCP2. It says hang on, opens hailing frequencies to DHCP2. To make sure that DHCP2 is also 2012, and everything gets set up. So here's what it looks like. I right-click the scope. Now, I love the guys in India because they're doing great stuff with networking. They've been given most of the networking now, so now they're doing DNS. I think some great things are going to come out of that. And they're terrific guys. They respond to emails. They respond to really, really great guys. But where did they get this wizard page from? I haven't seen this. See, remember with the dark blue and light? This is NT4. And then there's the folder. What's that got to do with DHCP? I'm like, where did that come from? You know? Then you pick the scope that you want to make into a failoverable. First thing you got to do is you got to pick a partner. So who's the partner going to be? Once you pick the partner, you go next. First thing you got to do is set a relationship name. All good relationships should have a name. Benefer, something like that, you know. Is that too dated? Sorry. And this screen is interesting. Here's a weird thing about this. So create a new failover relationship. So what do we got there? Relationship name, and then maximum client lead time. What does that mean? That means if I'm covering for you, I'll hand out addresses that only have a lease of 1 hour. I think it's 2 hours by default. What's the mode? There are two modes. Load sharing, hot standby. Everybody remember that? Any questions on that? Again, it's all really simple stuff, actually. Addresses reserved for the standby server. That 5% by default. You can change that if you want. But again, what does the standby server do normally? Nothing. It's just waiting for the big guy to die. Auto state switchover interval. That's a checkbox that is not checked. If you check it and you fill in a time, that will say, if you don't respond for a certain number of minutes, I'll assume you're dead and go on without you. Enable message authentication, and then it wants a shared secret, and we just type in some kind of text there. Questions on that, anybody? Is that all pretty simple stuff? Yes, please. Do you have to be in a 2012 domain? No, absolutely not. Just, I mean, your first two 2012 member servers could be DHCP servers, and everything works just fine.
And I can export from 2008 DNS?
You can export from a 2008 R2 DNS, a DHCP server, yeah, and all the tools you know still work.
Okay.
So, there's a question back there. Yes, sir.
We were talking about this earlier. So it
Yes, sir.
sounds like when your partner dies and the other box is determined it's dead, there's no recovery if the other box...
Oh, yeah, no. So what if I thought you were dead? I took you out of the loop and you're back. It's like 2 clicks and you're back. Because remember, this is so simple. I mean, you're thinking failover clusters where you're tearing your hair out and you got to go fix the Kerberos problem. No, none of that stuff happens here. This is designed by someone who uses the product. So other questions, anybody? Yes, please. Okay, so if we're doing DHCP and we're having it do the DNS, the dynamic DNS registration, how does that end up happening? I'm going to talk to you about that in just a minute. The short version, let me expand your question. If I'm DHCP 1 and I hand out a lease, how do you know about it? There's a communication that goes on every time. So there's a new kind of chatter. There's a new DHCP verb that appeared in the working paper. Okay? So when I do something, I tell you about it. Almost always. What happens in static reservations? It's good to have a shill in the audience. Have we ever met before, sir? It's okay. But you're about 2 slides too early, okay? Short answer is we have to update manually, okay? So, all right. Now it says, let's go ahead and do this. Here's the weird part. You never get this screen back. If you want to change any of these settings, too bad. Whoa. Wait a minute. Wait. Let me rephrase that. There is a way to solve the problem. I'm guessing you know what it is. Yeah, destroy the cluster and build it. No, that's not true. No. Don't destroy the cluster. Yeah, PowerShell will do it for you. I'm going to show you the PowerShell commands. All right. So then it thinks about it. And after it thinks about it, we're groovy. What if you want to manage the cluster? If you want to manage the cluster, PowerShell is your only option. You can find out about it by saying get-dhcp server v4 failover. It will show you the current status of your clusters. Set-dhcp v4 failover lets you do things like failover. Let's see some examples. Here's a real simple failover. Here I'm saying get-dhcp server v4 failover. I'm finding out the current status, and then I do it again 15 minutes later. So the first time you see it, they're exactly the same except for one thing. This is we're in communication interrupted mode. Notice that auto state switching interval is non-zero. That means we are going to fail over automatically. And notice afterwards, all I wanted you to see was that after 15 minutes, the partner down changes automatically. Some useful commands. Let's look at a few. I want to give you some prototypic set-dhcp v4 failover kind of stuff. So set-dhcp v4 failover, scope 1 clus. That's the name of my relationship. Dash auto state transition $true. That's the way that I'm going to say I want to do automatic failover. That's the way I'm checking that box. What if I want to change it? What's the opposite of $true? $false. Okay, why is there a $ in front of it? Because all variables in PowerShell have names that start with $signs. Okay? Anybody see anything wrong with that? Truth is not variable. That's what's wrong with this country. No, in actual fact, constants also have $. All right. State switch interval, that's the auto state switching interval. This says 2 hours before we give up on them. Maximum client lead time, 20. That in one command shows you everything you need to do to edit your cluster. Is that making sense? I've only got about a minute left. Okay? There's an example forcing a failure. That's another set. I just say dash partner down. So, I had a slide. I thought I did. So, I know I had it. I must have lost it. So let me tell you about something else. So the question was, how does DHCP Server 1 know about the things that DHCP Server 2 handed out? That's easy. That's part of their communication. Part of "are you still there?" is, oh, by the way, I gave out these addresses. Interestingly enough, some things do not get updated automatically. Some things do not get updated automatically. What you do in that case, if you made a change, like a reservation or something, from the UI, right-click and say replicate failover. Or replicate -DHCP server v4 failover. If you wanted to, you could take that PowerShell command and you could script it and have it run every 10 minutes. So, all right, I got 3 seconds. No, I don't. I'm over by 4 seconds. Sorry. So, one more thing. I really appreciate you guys coming here because I sure wanted to be at Jeff Snover's talk and you didn't go there. I really appreciate that. I'm talking again at 3 o'clock on Wednesday. I wanted to give myself a little bit of a challenge, so I'm going to be doing a talk about why Windows 8 isn't as bad as people say it is. And so I hope, really, there's some cool stuff in Windows 8. Thank you. Please don't forget the evaluation so they don't harm me back. And remember to use this knowledge for good, not for evil. Bye-bye.